All right. Welcome back from spring break. This week, we've got 2 chapters that we'll be going over, and I'm hoping that you'll watch this video and be able to get the themes so that you can quickly cover 2 chapters. My thought was that it would be spring break, and you may want to do some historical reading over spring break, or you may not, which if that's the case, let's just go over some finer points. That way you can skim through the chapter and be able to gain what you need out of that to be able to carry on a discussion this week, as well as take the test next week. Chapter 26. A few things that I want you to get out of chapter 26. There are crises on the Balkan Peninsula. Okay, these crises really lead to distrust with Germany. Germany distrusts what's going on. However, it cements a relationship with Russia, France, and Britain. And this is where we get into some issues that are going to lead to World War I. Okay, is the distrust, and these allies are lining ourselves with different countries so that when we have the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, that we're going to be in some big trouble. Actually, it's going to create a domino effect of countries going to war with each other, really over this distrust that's been festering for a while. Okay, World War I, we move into the most extensive war in Europe in a century. Europe has not seen a war like World War I for quite a while, and there are at least one generation, if not 2 generations, that have never been in a war similar to this, and this is what's going to cause this war to be called the Great War. Okay, but out of it, and we don't need to go into all of the milieu of World War I. I'm not looking for you to tell me about battles, about what happened, about when the United States came in. I'm not really looking for those. What I want you to understand is what's going on in Europe at that time, really what leads to World War I and what comes out of World War I. Okay, so a couple of things. The League of Nations comes out of World War I. As we well know, the United States does not ratify that treaty, and therefore the League of Nations kind of disbands, and it does form the UN later, but doesn't really have anything to do with it. That's completely different presidencies and leadership at that point. And so we don't, I wouldn't really bring in the United States if there's a test question about that. What I would talk about is the rise of the League of Nations and why they thought that it was important. The biggest point coming out of World War I, in my mind, is the war guilt clause that comes out of the League of Nations and of these leaders who decide that really what they need to do is have Germany pay reparations for starting the war. So this is something that is going to lead to resentment. Germany is not happy, and this gives rise to Adolf Hitler. Okay, so people are already not happy. It doesn't really say anything about Adolf Hitler and his leadership style. I hate the what if books, history books that say, well, what if he would have gotten into art school? He wouldn't. I don't really know, and I hate to try to assume what would have happened, because it didn't. What did happen is that there was all this resentment in Germany, and Hitler is able to step in and really unite this country that's mad at the rest of the world already. Okay, so war guilt clause on Germany. They ask that they pay reparations, which makes Germany a much poorer country and leads to this resentment that Germans are not happy, and that's going to give rise to World War II. Now, chapter 27 really is in between the wars. Okay, and not that we need to really spend a lot of time in between the wars either, which is why I put these 2 together, because World War I is great, especially if you're a military historian, which I am not, but if you were, it offers some really good history on World War I and some of the battles. And if you want to spend time reading that, feel free. If you want to add any of that to the discussion, that's great. The discussion piece this week really focuses on 3 things that you find different, or things that you didn't know that you saw in the reading this week. And so if you want to provide that stuff, feel free. That's just not what I'm looking for in this reading. I'm really looking for social history as a social historian, right? So, chapter 27, we get dictators. Dictators are coming from the left and the right, okay? You can't just say that, well, he was a leftist dictator or a right-wing dictator. They're on all sides, and they're all over Europe. And this is what's going to really lead us into World War II. Okay, the difference between this and other time periods, mass parties, mass well-organized political parties, is how these dictators are able to get into power. Except for the Bolsheviks, everybody is backed by mass political parties. Okay. The reason that dictators are able to do this, mass communication. You've got newspapers, you have people who are able to get out in these mass parties and they're changing people's minds, mass communication. But police force is huge because now you have power, okay? Party discipline. As I was rereading this chapter this week, I thought that this really rings home to us, or should, at this point in time, where I read a study last week during spring break about people identifying, it's out of Stanford, people identifying with political parties, and how it's part of our identity. And we just haven't seen that since World War II, or right before World War II. And so I think that this really aligns with what we're talking about. Party discipline. If you're Republican, you're Republican. If you're Democrat, you're Democrat. And you don't want any member of your family, or you don't want to associate with one or the other. And I find that interesting. That's what this study said from Stanford. And that's what we're seeing, is party discipline. That's how these dictators have so many people behind them, and they're willing to do whatever the dictator says. Okay? Ultimately, what this leads to is physical force, like we've not seen before. Okay? The Second Industrial Revolution allows for a level of physical force and political discipline, mass communication, that no other dictator prior to Stalin, Mussolini, and Hitler had before this time. I mean, nobody else would have had the technology to be able to move forward like they did, which is why we look back to World War II being such a big deal, and having, I mean, three or four mega dictators at the time. Okay, and their people that are behind them they're in it. And I think a lot of times, especially as Americans, we think, well, how is it that Nazis got behind Hitler? It just doesn't make any sense. The Germans would have said, yes, I'm signing on to this. But you had this idea of political discipline that we hadn't seen to that point, and you're in. Somebody says it, and yes, it doesn't matter what they say because that guy's saying it and I'm behind him. Okay. Anyway, take a look at the reading this week. These are the themes and concepts I want you to be able to pull out as you talk about in your discussions this week and as we move into the test next week. The test is going to be made up of the 4 questions, and I'll give you a study guide next week to be able to go off of, a study video. I've had a couple of students talk about potentially doing a longer video that would really go in more depth. In my first or in my one-on-one, in the first half of this course, it's an in-person lecture. And so I take the study guide and we go through everything. So all you've got to do is show up to class or show up that day of the test and write down what it is that we've already talked about. Now with these videos, I'm trying to keep them shorter, and you have the option of watching them or not. And so people have asked if maybe I did a 20-minute video on the study guides and be able to offer maybe more in depth on the questions. If that's something you would like, put it in your discussion this week. Just at the bottom, I'll see it. Say, yes, I would like a longer video. No, I don't want a longer video. I don't need to know why, just yes or no if that's something that you're interested in. I had one student talk about a live lecture, which I'm willing to do. I think that might be more difficult, and I've been trying to figure out how we could do that, but that is a way that I could do it as well, a live study guide lecture that would really give us more in depth on the questions. However, if it's more in depth, I'm going to require more of you. And my tests, I grade harder as we go along because I expect you to be getting better at these tests and understanding what it is that you need to be gleaning from the information to then put on the test. Ultimately, my hope for you on these tests is that you are critically thinking about some of these concepts and how they relate to our lives today. What can we take away from them? How can we move forward? And if you're doing that, I've probably seen it, and you're doing well on the test anyway, so I don't need to go into much of that. Let me know though if either of those ideas would work. 20-minute extra video or a live lecture, and let's see what we can do moving forward. I hope you have a great week. I hope you had a great spring break, and I hope that you're ready to kick it into high gear for the last several weeks as we finish out the semester. We'll talk to you later.